We are on the Hive Mind podcast, and we are talking about land problems, specifically the difference between ramp and good mana bases, and some of the discourse that's been happening lately. So, B, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and tell us where we can find you.
Of course. Hey, y'all. I'm B, aka Brujaja Gaming. You can mostly find me on Twitch, yelling at Magic the Gathering Arena's Shuffler. I also do D&D content as well. I stream pretty much every night of the week. Very late night streamer. I'm not good for daytime television. Yeah, otherwise you can find me on YouTube and TikTok.
Today we're talking about lands. When you hear land problem, what do you think of? What is the land of problems specifically in Commander right now?
In Commander, I feel like there has been, since I started playing in Commander, a constant debate on how many lands is the right amount of lands for commanders. And oddly enough, I feel like part of what is not mentioned nearly as much as it should is how fast you want the deck to go, as opposed to like how big of a mana cost your commander is.
Do you think that there's more land problems in 60 card formats as well?
So from my personal experience, anybody who watches my stream can confirm that I seem to be completely cursed. And I don't just mean arena. I mean on paper. I mean on Mox Field. It doesn't matter the platform. I seem to be land screwed. So it doesn't matter the format. I personally feel everything is a land problem all the time. I know it's not. I feel like 60 card formats are a little bit more stable when it comes to lands, only because I feel like there's a little bit less room for error. There's a little bit less room for jam packing it with support in lieu of lands. To me, it's more about how quick do I want that win? Like, I love standard, and I will purposely run lower lands and as many like super low drop things as I possibly can just to get it done quick. Whereas like Commander, it's like 37 lands is my average for like every deck. And then a bunch of mana rocks and a bunch of mana dorks. I can end up with 50% mana in the deck and still get screwed.
Yeah, that sounds
like,
about right.
It is possible.
You definitely see that in modern. It's much more modern, standard, what have you. The other 60 card formats, Pioneer, tends to be much more about playing things on curve and a lot less about ramping. Mostly because there's less options for that in those formats. But those decks are so much faster at getting the life total down, starting at 20, of course. Much less about ramp and much more about consistency. And even
like,
in those,
me,
you're gonna
like 60 card and 100 card to me are like the same cards, different games.
Commander often is called like Singleton Legacy and that kind of thing. I think that lands are actually kind of a solved issue because I don't think that variance in lands matters very much. Because if you put aside the factor of having the money for the physical cards, you could have a perfect mana base all the time. It wouldn't be hard. Like, there's no real decision making when it comes to lands. So I see more of a problem when it comes to like the ramp side.
I feel like it's the utility of the land that's a bigger consideration than like fixing it. Only meaning like, do I run a Ghost Quarter or not? Things like that.
Definitely not enough people are running a Ghost Quarter in general.
Don't get me started about land removal.
Oh, we're going to get into it for sure. I noticed that a lot of people tend to talk about with 60 card formats, it's more about, they complain about like fetches, right? They complain about color fixing and that color fixing should be a real thing you have to build around. But for me, it's being a solved issue. It's really like losing to variance on lands isn't really a skill issue. It's more of just getting unlucky. And see this a little bit in Commander too, but the games go a little bit longer, so you tend to have more time to fix it. It's not quite as a feel bad as long as you get lands, even if they're not the right colors necessarily.
Yeah, there's usually ways to fix. And honestly, the good thing about Commander in that regard is because there's 4 people, someone else is going to be the threat before you if you're moving slow. So you will likely have a few extra turns than you normally would have to get there. Because typically in like, especially mid and lower tempo, people are going to leave you alone and go for the threat.
Yeah, not an uncommon thing when you're behind on lands, just kind of get ignored, which can lead to its own problems when you come back out of nowhere. But it's definitely like
that is where I lose. That is where I always end up losing is I get land screwed and I can't get anything out. And then the threat gets removed, right? And now it's like, or right before the threat starts, well, right before they pop off, all of a sudden, my board is a war crime. I played with the creator Go Covert Blue once, and he's been doing Magic content forever and has been doing it professionally for a long time. So being able to like talk to him was really really cool. But I went from absolutely nothing happening onto my board to him calling me a monster and stealing my cards only to beat me and get me out of the game because I started being just an absolute terrorist at the table. I've
Yeah.
never been so complimented in my life. I-
It's crazy how quickly it can turn around, especially in formats that have access to so many cards. People talk about it with like Pioneer and other formats, even in historic, like things like fetches being a huge impact on the game. But I think it's mostly because they turn on certain strategies like domain, which is obviously a big thing
yeah,
in modern right now. But I
yeah,
don't think it's really like for me the mana fixing itself has never really been the thing. There's not that many good multicolor spells that you would play over anything else. I think it's really overblown and people talk about it like it would change the game. Like you would play all these different spells, and I still think you play the best spells in the format kind of regardless. I don't think you really worry about
we
the mana
find a
fixing.
way. When it comes to land specifically, there's so much that, again, saying money not being an object, if all of us could get the lands that we wanted and needed, it would be even easier. But even the slower speed, I guess, the less optimized stuff will still get you there and can get you there very quickly.
Yeah. And
And
it's not
rocks also
even
make it easy.
yeah, it's not even necessarily like less optimized to play around monocolor cards. Like they're still pretty good, primarily if you're in green, but that's
Oh God.
green has
Green,
everything,
you
so
know
that's
what?
not
Green
really
doesn't count. Green, the rest of the conversation should be about the not green colors that don't have everything possible for it.
green is like the real problem, I feel like, because ramp is way more powerful than utility on
The
its own.
second I miss a land drop in a commander game against a green deck, I have anxiety.
The thing about green that really annoys me is that one, they constantly ramp out of control and it just snowballs. But the real problem with it is that green's creatures are not overcosted in the first place to make up for the fact that they're ramping very hard. You still
Yeah,
get like insanely powerful cards
they
just
could be more
underrate.
expensive. They could have been.
So it's like
They
not
could have
only
been.
are they ramping and being able to cast more spells, the spells themselves are also undercosted. I mean,
Like
Questing Beast
who?
on its own is a great example there.
I have PTSD from that card, and I know I'm not the only one. That thing in standard, go away.
Yeah, and it's just kind of
Go
silly
away.
that they can cast that on turn 3 because they ramped on turn 1 and 2.
It's
It's just
wild, but I also am a definitely like a little Golgari psychopath and absolutely love it. Like Gitrog is one of my favorite commanders. The Gitrog
hmm.
monster, one of my all-time favorite commanders.
Yeah,
One of my favorite
the
decks.
the poster child for land problems.
Yep, yep. And I've gotten land screwed in that deck. I was honestly impressed at that point.
I actually had a, Omnath, Angry Omnath, and Gruul Omnath deck that I borrowed to someone, and,
Mm,
that deck had 50 lands in it,
it
and
pops.
someone borrowed it from me and got land screwed. I
Oh
don't know how.
no. Oh no.
It's just statistically impossible,
I
to
had that
not have,
deck for
like,
like five
multiple lands
minutes.
and the ramp.
I had that deck for a little bit, so I totally get it. That deck is very silly. It gets so out of control so quickly.
Mhm.
Classic bullshit. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think landfall as a strategy is a little overpowered just because there's not really a way to stop ramp from happening. Specifically
Yeah.
with like cards like Tatiova that are also drawing you cards. I think
Yup.
that's a little busted. I actually don't mind land strategies that do something else, basically. Like some of the ones that put like plus encounters on their guys, that's fine. But I don't want you to draw cards. I don't want you to get card advantage from doing your game actions. Like that's just a little bit too far.
Meanwhile, my favorite interaction on the board of honest might be one of my favorite interactions of all time is just Tatiova and the Gitrog monster just out at the same time.
Yeah, it gets absolutely absurd. Absolutely.
I've had so many people scooped that once it starts getting out of control. It's very funny. And I have that in like a Muldrotha deck.
Yeah, that seems very good where you can recur it. It's
Yep.
also
It's a fan.
the thing is that as long as you've got a card advantage engine, which you do if you're playing landfall. It doesn't really matter what else you do. You're just going to overwhelm your opponents. That's why I tend to value ramp as being the problem. And there's not really a way to beat it.
Yeah. And I honestly feel like it feels the intended speed of the game for me would determine whether or not ramp or card draw is a bigger threat. For me, mid and slower tempo, ramp is the bigger threat because everybody's kind of moving the same speed except the person who is now being able to ramp a lot harder. They're just moving faster. And in low and like mid tempo games, they're going to get to the win faster. They're going to become a threat faster, typically. Whereas higher power, everybody's already running those fast rocks. We already know what we're going to see. We need to get as many cards in our hand as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good
Touch all
point.
the cards.
That's a very good point. I really like that in higher power, everyone's kind of like on the same level. So the ramp isn't quite as absurd. And you're also playing lower land counts
Yeah.
anyway.
Ramp at higher level is, to me, not overwhelming, even from the green players. I run 2 very strong mono black decks, and I don't have ramp, but I have ways to make my swamps tap for a bajillion black each.
Yeah.
It's like black ramp.
Other colors have their ways of ramp, and that's fine. Color shifted versions of these effects are honestly, I think, healthy for the game. I love that red can make treasures. I love that black can make their swamps tap for more.
Yeah.
Blue has access to some of those effects, but mainly it's the untapping thing.
White has a
white
lot
is-
of planes fetch.
Yeah, I was gonna say
lot
white
of
sat in the
planes fetch.
corner, but yeah, they sort of have things.
If you want to play at planes, they have it. And then land tax. And then that's it.
Luckily, we've got a lot more support for white in that regard. They get a lot more card advantage. Unfortunately, it's just tied to other people also getting ahead. Never really been a fan of catch-up ramp, even though it's practically guaranteed if you're playing against a green player. I've just never been a fan of cards that do nothing if you're not behind.
No, I can understand that.
Do you think that there should be a way to handle mass ramp without just necessarily destroying everyone's lands? There's been a lot of talk about mass land destruction being kind of incorrectly a taboo thing, and I don't necessarily agree. But lots of people have been saying like it's fair because we all go back to zero. What do you think about that?
I don't think just because it applies to everybody that makes it fair. Everybody's deck doesn't move the same speed. So you did, in fact, set people back no matter what. Just because it happened to everybody doesn't mean it happened equally. It's not happening in a vacuum. When did you play the board wipe? How close to the end were we? Did you do it because you didn't want to get punched? Or did you do it because you had a win con to follow it up with? I think, and this is how I feel about every pretty much card and strategy that people dislike, with the exception of like one. I think they're all just applied so poorly that it has left such a bad taste in people's mouths. Because mass land destruction with an immediate win to follow up, I think, is the correct way to play it if you're going to run it. I run that. I have an Armageddon in my Liaisa Forgotten Archangel commander deck, and it is a hard exile. So those lands are not coming back from the graveyard. They're gone. I'm only going to play that if I have enough like commander and creature damage to go wide and slap. Otherwise, it gets discarded. It gets exiled. It goes away.
Do you think
It's very situational, but it's part of the win if I need it.
Yeah, do you think it's maybe too situational to include it all? Or do you think that it's okay to have that nuke button if it's built in as part of your win condition, of course?
If it's built in as part of the win condition, to me, it makes sense to just like have it. Otherwise, does it? I obviously can't speak on behalf of all commanders because there are thousands of legendary creatures, but if it doesn't play into the win con or it doesn't directly work with your commander's mechanic and then play into a win con, to me, it doesn't make sense. It's a board wipe, but what's the goal?
Right. You don't want to necessarily abuse that privilege.
Like if I'm playing a treasure deck, I don't have an issue getting a land wipe. Chances are I'll have a ton of treasure. I'm playing a treasure deck, but what was the point?
Right.
Unless I crack those treasures immediately into a win, what's the point?
Yeah, I know like with Worldfire, I've played decks with Worldfire where the idea was I'm going to tap all my lands and then cast things after I've exiled everybody's stuff. It wasn't very good, but it was a strategy.
It may not have been a good strategy, but it was I think that's like the appropriate context. You're playing it into a very specific mechanic as part of your win that you want to do. I try really hard to look at cards as just a piece of a puzzle without trying to think of necessarily how it affects anything beyond the mechanic of the deck. It's the only time I really try to look at stuff in a vacuum is how does it work within this 100 card set? And where do I go from there? And then from there, it's for me, just what kind of experience are we looking for at the table? Like, do we want to have a brutal game or do we want to barely pay attention? Like, I'm not running my mass land destruction in a let's barely play attention game.
Yeah, that would be, it feels bad. I've often joked about playing my Carmen deck, and I can be trusted with balance. You can take it off the ban list.
Totally.
I am normal and can be trusted with mass sacrifice.
I don't know. I don't even feel necessarily concerned about, nobody cancel me for this. I don't even feel necessarily concerned about feel bad moments when it comes to like board wipes. Because I feel like the feel bad moment comes mostly from inappropriately played wipes. If I'm making sense. Like you just wiped that for the sake of wiping that. You had no
I'm totally in agreement with you on that.
Like the person who cyclonic rifts at the end of the game because they don't want to get killed by the girl player. Like they're like, you didn't need to overload that cyclonic rift. You did not. Why did you do that?
Yeah, I think strictly better to overload it, but I also cyclonic rift is one of those cards specifically I wouldn't care if it got banned because it never feels good. Never feels good to get cyclonic rifted.
Oh, see, I'm bored of it.
Yeah, I don't even play it.
Expect it in every blue deck at this point, and I'm like, but for what? I'm gonna win on turn 20 without it as it is because this deck is. I just want to make a bunch of weird little guys. I don't need it in here.
Blue has a plethora of options to deal with whatever. Yeah. They really don't need a one-sided board wipe that can just prolong the game.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like. Played against plenty of cyclonic rifts that were played completely appropriately, overloaded appropriately, plenty of times. And then I've played with just as many that were totally inappropriate, extended the game for entirely too long. And in many of the cases, in my opinion, I was like, that is heat that is so unnecessary for that deck. Sometimes you can over-optimize and it backfires.
For sure. I think that is kind of like a power level discussion thing too, where the card is strictly better, but it's also makes for a worse player experience, which is always antithetical to playing Commander.
Yeah, it may not be appropriate for the speed y'all are looking to go.
The other problem with wipes too is that specifically this is a green problem, but it can also be a problem with like red, where other colors or other decks in specific are going to recover way, way faster. But this is obviously a problem with green. This is why I tend to shy away from the mass land destruction conversation, is because wiping everybody's lands, the green player is going to get ahead again anyway. So it never really made sense. Like the people who are playing Boros are going to suffer way, way more than the green player is. So you really didn't help the board any.
Yeah. Like it's okay sometimes to not play that card. Not necessarily because you don't want like anybody to feel bad, but because it's just not an appropriate play. It's okay not to play the cards, y'all. It's
I should do a whole episode of just like cards you should play but shouldn't play.
Yeah, like think about it. Think to the next sentence. That's all. Now that being said, I am a board wipe fanatic. I fucking love them. I rarely play them, and I've gotten better at them. Of course, I had to like figure it out along the way. But probably my most embarrassing board wipe. This was on a streamed game. Everybody knew it was in the deck and everything. So this was one of those, like, everybody was well matched and like totally cool with every bit of nonsense we had in each other's decks going full tilt. And I had Liliana Dreadhorde General and I was playing God Eternal Bond 2 as my commander. And I was able to trigger her little ultimate where you keep one land, one creature, one of each permanent, and everything else gets sacked.
Notably a fair effect.
I was so land screwed that they all caught up and surpassed me. And I was so embarrassed because I really thought, because I had things I could win with in my hand and I could not cast them. I had a
Yeah,
life drain combo in my hand and I could not cast it. So depressing.
it absolutely sucks. And
Yeah.
one sideboard wipes are kind of a thing. You can kind of build into that a little bit, but man, it's just such a feels bad. I don't like answers that involve taking away people's ability to cast spells because I don't want to play around someone's mana because I feel like that's just like a component of the game we're playing around. It's not like a main feature. I want to play
Mm.
around people's intents and like their deck building. I want to play my cards against your cards. It's not fun for me if you don't get to play.
Yeah. I like playing at a silly level where it's just like nonsense and shenanigans. I try to build at different power levels. And my janky stuff is just, it's so slow and it's so bad and it never wins. And I don't care.
Hmm.
I'm just there to barely pay attention anyway. So it doesn't have to be good.
That's fair. I think that's a healthy way to play the game.
And then I have my super powerful ones where me and my friends will get together and be like, all right, you want to slap the shit out of each other and trash talk the whole time? Yeah. Yeah. Let's go.
Do you
And
think
it's just fun.
do you think the green ramp decks are like automatically a notch higher just because they can ramp, like
Um,
regardless of how you build it?
I mean, they're definitely faster, no matter how much the rest of us ramp. The fastest of which, Gruel, in my opinion.
Then you've got
That's sheer
lands and
speed.
treasures.
Lands and treasure, absolutely blasting through big old creatures pretty quick.
They love Gruul as a color combo. There's not too many good Gruul commanders for strategies I like, but the ones I did like,
I,
nobody else liked, and so I took them apart.
I haven't found one that's like hit me yet, with the exception of, I don't know what the reprint was in Eldraine, but Daryl from the Walking Dead
Mm.
Secret Lair. I've been meaning to for a very long time. Boy's been sitting on my desk. I'm going to build a Goad Gruul deck out of him because I think it's the funniest thing ever to make zombies for other people and then make a horde attack each other on the board and not.
I have a suggestion for a
It's very funny.
Gruul commander for you that does a similar thing, which is Kaima the Fractured Calm is a very, very funny
Which
Go
one is that?
deck. It's no one knows what this card is because nobody played it but me. I'm fairly certain. So it's actually from Kamigawa.
Oh, okay.
I believe it was also reprinted in the Yucapena Precons. I want to say it could be wrong on that because I'm not super in tune with where cards come from a lot of the times. I think it might have been like maybe that was the first place. I feel like it was reprinted
I
recently.
have only been playing since Zendikar Rising and could not tell you half the sets things have come out in.
Yeah, it's so hard to keep track of anything.
They come out quick. What can I say?
Maybe it was the Kamigawa Precons. I think it might have been because it was like the that style, the I guess the revamped like Asian culture style. But Kaima basically goads each creature your opponents control that are enchanted by an aura you control. So
Mm.
you get to
I
play
do know
all the
this
worst.
commander.
Yeah, you get to play very
I
funny,
have
cheap
him.
enchantments. Yeah.
He might have to go in there because somebody did gift all the Walking Dead commanders to me. Very sweet. But under the contingency that I would build them. And I built Glenn Voice of Calm and I built Michonne. And now I'm obsessed with my Michonne deck and got distracted by that.
Oh, the distractions never end, especially now that we're back into previous seasons.
Dude, meanwhile, I have like 5 or 6 decks on my desk right now. 4 of which I'm currently building. I lied. 5 of them I'm building, and then another like 6 that I'm tweaking. And it's full now. So I'm not allowing myself to add anymore until these are done.
I feel you. I think the riser on my desk is magic cards all the way across.
And speaking of lands, one of them that I'm building, and I think I'm done collecting cards and I can actually go through, is a Hackball of the Surging Soul. So he does all exploring in lands.
That's what my cat does. He hacks up balls of hair.
There you go. Your cat's a merfolk commander now.
I have a seething hatred of Simic commanders because almost none of them are very interesting. I do like
don't blame you.
Hackball because I think Explore is a very fun mechanic, but in general, mechanics that say like, "Hey, draw a card or ramp," are just
Yeah.
so overdone.
Normally not my jam. I do like playing Simic commanders that utilize 1/1 counters and just like growing creatures really, really. I'm a very big like creature damage, go wide practically no other win con ever kind of person, unfortunately. But Hackball was kind of that, and then some, Simic bullshit. And I've been wanting to build merfolk. I love merfolk so much. Someone called them wet elves to me once, and I haven't stopped laughing about that since.
They are, and when people say that, I never think of actual merfolk. I think of like a Llanowar elves creature just soaking wet. It's very funny.
That'll be my first Simic commander, so that'll be fun. If I get land screwed in an explore deck, I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna come back to this conversation and I'm gonna let you know.
Please do. I'm sure it'll happen at least once. That's the universe loves to align against us.
Oh yeah. Actually, you know what I've had a problem with lands, I find? Is balancing the amount of untapped lands that hit the battlefield. Because it seems I only draw them early game, and I feel like that's just the curse of Magic.
I feel like that's the best time to be doing that, isn't it? Just be drawing them.
I feel like it is on turn like 1 or 2, but after that, we're just getting excessive.
I think it's very obnoxious to draw tap lands when you want to cast like a rock on 2 and your second land's a tap land. Like that feels bad.
Yes, that's always what happens, and so funny.
I basically don't play any lands that come into play tapped no matter what. I think the only real exception would be like the new Surveil lands.
I like duels, so I try to run as many of those as I can afford. And because I am cheap and I have a lot of cards already, I end up running a lot of the dual lands that come out tapped, which, not a complaint. They work. I need both colors.
Right.
But, I have a bad habit of overdoing it.
I have an inkjet printer.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah,
I actually stopped proxying expensive cards as much as I could for 2 reasons. In my higher power decks, I'm still doing it, and with the intention of trying to buy those cards as soon as I can. Like, I cried when I bought my first Exquisite Blood. It's one of my favorite enchantments, and I use it the most. But with my like mid to lower tempo decks, I'm just trying to find, I guess, cheaper and less efficient alternatives that work.
See, for non-land cards, I would tend to agree. But with lands, I've never really cared to moderate my like power level or anything that way, because it's just never. I don't want to like. There's no way to play around having tap lands.
Yeah,
you can play around having worse versions of cards.
Yeah, but like, I'm not gonna play a Nykthos in a game I want to end on turn 20. It's too speedy.
I guess the way I approach lands is that I always think of it as like, I just need to be able to cast my things. I'm not really going that much for utility lands, but I want to be able to get my colors. Like, I want lands to be a non-factor for me. Like, I want to cast things on curve and always have the colors to, like, if it was just like Hearthstone or whatever, where you just get the resource guaranteed no matter what, like, I would be fine.
That's fair.
Utility lands are where I take issues.
I love utility lands. I typically only play with very, very few. Like, a Reliquary Tower and a Ghost Quarter tend to be my baseline, or like Demo Field, a Volatile Fault, whatever I have, just like lying around because they're cheap. I always run a Ghost Quarter, and I will absolutely die on the hill that you need to run single target land removal. No one is forcing you to use it. Just run it.
Absolutely.
Because people will use very powerful utility lands, and they will use it in slower games and run away with the game. And it's okay to remove a Nykthos or a Gaia's Cradle. Like, it's okay. And especially things like Ghost Quarter and Volatile Fault and Demolition Fields, whatever that land is that you've removed gets replaced by a basic. The number of lands on your opponent's battlefield is not changing. If you're worried about staying fair or a feel bad moment, it's not the best, but they still get a land to replace it.
Yeah, I think you could take that even a step further. I think even Strip Mine is fine in the context of removing like a powerful. Don't like remove your opponent's only colored source, because that's just mean. But actually, yeah, Gaia's Cradle is a game winning card. You absolutely. And the thing is, it's a very non-impactful thing to put that in your mana base. It's not a spell. I think that's where people tend to get a little crazy with it, is they want to play Ruination and like actual like spells to remove lands, and I think that's like a waste of a slot. I think I would rather just play a
I
good
do
card.
too. Like a Ghost Quarter taps for colorless. It's fine.
Definitely be running at
No.
least Ghost Quarter or whatever version of this
Oh,
effect you can get on your
Wastelands.
lands.
Wasteland, although expensive, I was lucky enough to pull from Fallout. So I was able to bop those in some decks. But even that, it's like it taps for colorless and it wrecks a land.
Whatever version of this
That's it.
effect you can get is worth playing. I think you should always be playing like a Ghost Quarter-esque effect, and you should always be playing like Scavenger Grounds if your mana base can afford it. Those kind of utility lands are good for the game because they're giving you more effects without having to give up slots.
And like as a recursion player, we prepare for graveyard hate. We prepare for people to exile our graveyard and be able to fill it up again really, really quickly. But it's definitely a speed bump and it can be enough to like stop the recursion player for a few turns
Hmm.
and surpass them and things like that. Like I think having the utility available makes it easier to balance games. I started running Ghost Quarter because World Tree was in standard. So I started running Ghost Quarter wasn't in standard at the time, but I started running whatever it was. Maybe it was, whatever it was, because freaking World Tree was in standard and all the gods were just everywhere at that time. Oh my God, they were so annoying.
Yeah, I think
That
that
was it.
having answers for things like Field of the Dead is really just
Yeah,
just
like
cards
you
that generate more advantage. Like you have no way of interacting with them normally. I think you need to have something
yeah,
for that.
yeah, circling back to Landfall, get Field of the Dead off the board.
Also,
Like,
get it out
no,
of
it's
my
not going to be a
format.
problem.
Like I
Like, no,
play
it's
it.
not going to be a problem in every game.
Oh,
I understand that, but it is so easy to run away.
it really is. I love playing these utility lands, but I hate playing against them. I hate playing against Field of the Dead. I hate playing against
Yep.
Glacial Chasm. Like that's a card you need to be able to just destroy.
You really only need a piece. You
Hmm.
need a piece of land removal. I think there is a difference between land removal and land destruction. Destruction just implies kind of in mass to
Hmm.
me. So calling it mass land destruction makes sense, and calling it, land removal for me implies on a much, much smaller scale.
One thing to
I don't
do
know.
is
I could
that
be crazy.
no,
Sorry.
you're absolutely right there. I think that's probably a more succinct way of phrasing it. One thing I like to do if you're playing like indestructible lands, like you're playing any of the bridges or you're playing Darksteel Citadel, you can
Mm,
actually play some of the land destruction spells that search you a land, and you can just ramp yourself with them.
yeah.
Which is like not every deck's going to be able to do that, but like you can. If this is a problem in your meta, like you can do that. Most
There
of
are
them are
reasons
cantrips.
some of these lands are restricted and banned outside of Commander in 60 card formats and
Hmm.
competitive formats. They're powerful. They're powerful. And yeah, obviously it's different when it's in a Commander deck and it's singleton. Doesn't mean that green player is not going to run a Field of the Dead.
Yeah, they probably
Doesn't mean a Yarick deck would not benefit from one.
are. We got a
Like,
blue
let's be real.
enchantment a while back that feels like it's supposed to punish ramp, but it really doesn't. Where when a land enters and it's not the first land that turn, you bounce a land to their hand. And it's
Yep.
so bad because those players often have like extra land plays. So it's like,
Yep.
oh, now I have an extra land to play. And they just get more of
Yep.
their effect. And it just kind of ends up helping them. I wish they would
Yeah.
revisit cards to actually try to beat ramp, but in a way that's not destructive. Because I
Yeah.
think the idea there is good, but like I almost want to play that in my Simic ramp decks is like, oh, I can bounce my lands and play them again. Gonna be insane. Tatiova, for example.
Tatiova's hilarious and out of control, and I love her and I hate her.
And the Necro Bloom coming out soon too is also going to be
I have
a huge problem.
anxiety, but I also desperately need it.
I
Like,
definitely have a list already ready to go. But I'm a Dredge fanboy. Probably
oh, I
nobody who's
don't blame
watching
you.
has watched me play Dredge on Twitch, but I'm firmly like playing Dredge in Modern every single time. Like I don't really play other decks. So
It's so fun.
getting a commander with Dredge on the card, so stupid.